Amaia Arranz Otaegui. I work as an archaeobotanist at the National Museum of Natural History, and I also collaborate with the Copenhagen University. And I specialize on the study of the uses of plants by prehistoric hunter-gatherers and early farming communities in Southeast Asia. And here's Lara. I don't know if she can talk and say hello too, just before we start.
Hi, my name is Lara Gonzalez Carretero, and I am an archaeobotanist as well. I work at the Museum of London Archaeology and at the British Museum, and I specialize on the analysis of archaeological food remains, such as bread.
So first of all, we should thank both Rob and Michelle for inviting us. I say it's really a pleasure, and we are learning a lot from the other many talks that you can watch on the YouTube channel, which are super interesting. And for me personally, I'm learning quite a lot about all these fermentations and all these other topics that are linked to bread. So today we will be talking about the prehistory of bread, what we know about the origins of bread and what we don't know, which is quite a lot actually. And we will try to provide like an overview of the evidence we have so far. So before we start, I think it's convenient to make a question. So what we are talking about, so what is bread and how we can define that? I would say that bread is a rather cultural term that makes reference to different types of foods actually, because if I think of bread, in Spain, we eat a lot of French baguette, but somebody in Syria or in Jordan would be eating a bread that looks like these flat breads. And perhaps somebody from Ethiopia would be eating bread that looks more like a crepe almost, so it's called injera. And all these are bread remains, so all these are bread, but they're very different in terms of the ingredients and the cooking methods. So how do we define bread? And if we go to the dictionary, bread is defined as a food which is made from flour. And here, be careful because flour can be obtained from multiple types of plants. So not only cereals, we can make flour with other types of plants too. And then a liquid is added, so in this case water, but it could also include milk, for example. And it usually has yeast, but this is not necessary always. So these ingredients are mixed together to form a dough that can be baked. And here I would add that bread can also be fried or steamed, for example. So it's very important to think about bread with an open mind, in the sense that, especially when we talk about prehistoric bread, these type of foods could have been very different from what we eat nowadays and what we call as bread. So that said, what are the origins of bread? The origins have been traditionally associated to the Neolithic period. And this is so because the bread we eat nowadays, especially in Europe, or I believe that also in the United States, it's made from cereals. And cereals were first domesticated during the Neolithic period. So to understand this process, we actually have to make a journey to Southeast Asia, which is the region of the world that comprises modern day countries like Syria, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and so forth. And this is the region where the wild ancestors of modern domesticated species grew spontaneously, and people for thousands of years were exploiting these cereals, these wild species. So the origins of bread are linked to the development of agriculture. And this process was very long. So here you can have a view of the different steps in this very long process of development. And here during the Neolithic period, the story basically was that people first started to cultivate wild cereal species. And this happened more or less around 11,600 years ago. Then, like within 1,000 years, people started to exploit both wild and domesticated cereals. So it was like a mix of species. And then around 10,000 years ago, it's when we start to talk about agriculture. So we are here talking about societies that rely on the exploitations of domesticated species. And it was in this context that the earliest evidence for bread making was found. So the story was that people first start to cultivate, domesticate, agriculture emerges, and then as a result of that, people start to consume bread, beer, porridges, and things like that. The thing is that some scholars were suggesting that people could have been making bread before the Neolithic period. So that was suggested especially for the Epi-Paleolithic hunter-gatherers and especially for the Natufian culture, which are very special hunter-gatherers. They inhabited Southwest Asia around 15,000 to 11,600 years ago, and they are really cool. So these hunter-gatherers are the first communities that start to settle down and build stone houses, as you can see in the image. Then they started to use very intensively all these mortars and querns to process plant remains and also to process animal remains. Then they produce all these really beautiful artistic and symbolic manifestations and decorations. So we have decorated skulls, we have jewelry, we have very elaborated burials with associations with animals and so forth. And they also produce sickle blades, so specialized tools for harvesting plants. And these sickle blades have been associated to the harvesting of cereals. So I was actually very lucky to be involved in an excavation of a Natufian site called Shubeika 1 and located in northeastern part of Jordan. And this was directed by Tobias Richter at the University of Copenhagen. And it was a wonderful, it is actually a wonderful site, very well preserved. So here you can see the main structure made with all these lovely basaltic stones with a huge fireplace in the middle. And we were focusing on the excavation of these fireplaces. And the reason is that people that were living in this hut, they used the fireplaces, they used lots of plants and animals, and then they left. So they left all the fireplaces in situ for us to study, and it was wonderful. We found this fireplace, and then apparently people abandoned the site, and when they came back, they actually made another fireplace almost in the same location with similar characteristics. And literally in these fireplaces, we found thousands and thousands of plant remains and animal remains and some tools too. So within the plant assemblages, I was really, really, excited to find a huge amount of tubers. And tubers are the underground part of the plant. So it's like a root, which is, thickened, so to say. And this is a wetland plant that grows close to the lakes and so forth, and it's edible. It's a very interesting plant. We will talk about it in a minute. And then, of course, I found lots of other plants like mallow, poppy, saltbush, also some wild cereal grains like barley, acorn, and oat. All these are wild species. And then I found something strange. Amorphous, as you can see, it's quite ugly indeed. So, and quite small. So this can be less than 1 centimeter. So these are called like amorphous remains of plant tissues or objects, basically. And the thing is that, at the beginning, nobody has been paying much attention to this type of remains. And this has to do with our discipline, with archaeobotany. So archaeobotany studies basically the interaction of humans and the environment, on how people were using plants and so forth in the past through the analysis of plant remains from archaeological sites. And there are many types of plant remains that we can find in archaeological sites, but within those that we can see with our naked eye, which the ones that are quite big, include primarily seeds, chaff, wood charcoal, fruits and nuts, tubers, and things like that. So people have been digging and trying to recover this type of plant remains and analyzing them and so forth. But the study of these amorphous remains has been something that in the last 5-10 years has started to develop. So it's extraordinary to think that apart from seeds, fruits, and nuts, we are actually finding food remains, so processed or prepared plant foods in our sites. And that's quite new. And I think it's very interesting because it's providing us with the evidence not only of the plant species that were used as food, but also of the cooking processes and final products. And that's very, very interesting. So in order to analyze these food remains, these amorphous remains that were found in Shubeika 1, I established a collaboration with Lara, who at that time was conducting a PhD on the study of food remains from archaeological sites, one of the very few PhDs on this subject. So the result was this paper that was published a couple of years ago, showing that bread, the origins of bread could be found like at least 14,000 years ago. So this paper was relevant first because it was showing us that food remains are preserved in very, very old sites, hunter-gatherer sites, and they will provide us very important information. And also because we were able to reconstruct some of the sequence of the activities that led people to actually bread making in Shubeika. So through the study of these food remains, especially focusing on the plant particles, the plant tissues that are embedded in these amorphous remains, we identified ingredients like wild cereals, especially wheat, barley, and then oat could have been also used, and then these club-rush tubers that I mentioned before. So these were present also in the amorphous remains. Then in terms of the microstructure, these amorphous remains resemble flatbreads, and this is considering factors like the micropores, the quantity, the number of pores, their size, and so forth. So this is telling us that these people were harvesting all these ingredients. So it was a bread that contained several types of plants. So they harvested all these wild cereals. They process them because it's very difficult to process the wild cereals. They clean up the tubers, they peel them, they pound them, they make flour, and then they mix this flour with water to produce a dough. And we don't really know how this dough, this flatbread, could have been, cooked or baked, but we think we were conducting some experiments a couple of years ago, and we tried two systems or two ways. So we were burying the flatbread, so the dough, under the ashes of the hot ashes, basically, in the fireplace. And we also tried heating a basalt stone, which works very well. Actually, it gets very high temperatures, and it's very easy to cook a dough or even fry an egg in such a hot stone. So these could be some of the ways of how people were cooking these doughs in the past. So this evidence was showing us for the first time that bread was not a product of the Neolithic period, so it was invented by hunter-gatherers. And I believe that this is not the oldest evidence of bread. I think we will find older evidence for bread making dating to 20,000, whatever the date. The important thing here is to highlight that they were hunter-gatherers producing this. And what we don't really know is whether this food was something that they were cooking in a daily basis, or it could have been something special. So nowadays bread is consumed like in a daily basis. So I eat bread every day, and there are several countries where bread is a staple, but we don't really know what it was like in the past during this time. So now we are trying to know what happened actually during this crucial 4,000 years, from the last hunting and gathering communities to the first farming, and then the domestication process in these early agricultural villages, to try to see what they were eating, if they were eating bread, if they were eating bread in a daily basis of what. There is a gap that we have to fill, basically, because the next evidence for bread is dated to 9,100 years. And that's a bread that was found in a very, very famous Neolithic site called Shetal Huyuk, which Lara has studied extensively. And she will basically tell us how the story continues. So what we know about bread after these early phases of use and production. So I will stop sharing the screen, and Lara, if you want to continue.
Hi, sorry. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. And so, as Amaia was saying, the story continues in the Neolithic. So it is important to look at the gap that Amaia showed between the hunter-gatherers and the Neolithic period. However, I'm going to show you how by the Neolithic in the Near East or Southwest Asia, the bread culture and the preparation of bread and daily eating of bread was actually established, and bread was staple food for these people. So during the pre-pottery Neolithic, what we see, it's actually very important to talk about bread during the pre-pottery Neolithic, because what we see is the establishment of societies that are producers of food. So these people are actually investing in domestication of crops, obviously cereals, and also pulses and legumes, animals such as sheep and goat. And these people are actually gathering in larger groups, larger than during the Natufian and the Paleolithic. And they are establishing big villages and what we will call the early village life. And some of these villages actually are as big as 10 or 11 hectares, as they as Çatalhöyük, and one of the most important sites in this area of the world, will show. These people actually use stone vessels, and they moved from mortars and vessels to grinding slabs or grinding stones, which are more suited to cereal preparation. And they also moved from having a communal or more social way of food consumption into a more private one within the household. So these people will cook around the fire, around the oven, because we also see the introduction of the oven as a cooking appliance during the Neolithic, which will make bread baking a lot easier and a lot faster. And so later we will also see the diversification of these foods and these cereal products with the addition of pottery to the cooking technology as well. And so it was established some years ago. There are two confronting and contrasting culinary traditions around the world, from Southwest Asia to East Asia, really. So we do have the area of research that we are talking about today. We do have it in the center of a grinding and roasting and baking culinary tradition, in which people were actually focusing on grinding cereals into flour and baking bread. So this area is located in Near East and North of Africa. And this is in contrast with the South and East Asian steaming and boiling tradition, which was focused on rice and millets being boiled and steamed in cooking vessels, which were actually much earlier than any domesticated crops in the area. So we do see these two contrasting culinary traditions, and we do see the appearance of ovens in Southwest Asia around 8000 BC, roughly, with pit ovens. And then we will see how bread making ovens like tanur or tandir ovens will appear around sometime 7000 BC. Now, the idea was to try, when I studied my research, was to try to attest if actually these communities in the Neolithic, not only from the archaeological record, as I just showed, and these contrasting Neolithic traditions, but also from the actual evidence of direct consumption of bread, if we could actually attest that these people were part of a bread culture and that they were actually eating bread in a daily basis. So my research focused on a very well-known site. It's a UNESCO site, which has been excavated for more than 30 years. It's the site of Çatalhöyük. It's located in central Anatolia. This site has a continuous occupation of longer than 1,000 years. And it has amazing preservation. We can see how houses were basically abandoned and burned and left everything behind, and we can even study daily activities such as, you know, not only cooking but anything that you can imagine. We know everything about these people. Some of the buildings are very well preserved as well, as you can see, and there is a dirty area and a clean area, archaeologically speaking. The dirty area is the one that is giving us information about bread baking and cooking traditions and cooking technology, which is this one by the fire and by the oven. And then we do have the clean area, which is this series of platforms under which people were burying the dead. When I first started working at the site, there had been some very valuable studies by Christine Harstorff and Sonia Atalay back in 2005, trying to tackle down and trying to like track some type of culinary tradition and food production at Çatalhöyük. However, they thought that bread was only a minor component of the diet. And actually, when I joined the project, we realized that these type of amorphous remains, which were called bread remains or food remains, were actually everywhere in every sample that we were excavating. And so I decided to focus my PhD research on this type of remains. And after a lot of experimentation and a lot of different types of analysis, which focus on the analysis of these things under the SCM, I was able to create a coherent methodology for the analysis of archaeological food and mainly bread. And I was able to identify 4 different types of products in Çatalhöyük. And these are not only bread, but also a type of bread dough, a flatbread, a porridge-like material, and also a naturally leavened bread. Obviously, flatbread was the most commonly recovered from the archaeological record. And some of the ingredients that we found that they were made of were cereals, almost 90%, as you would expect from bread, would be made of cereals. But also we saw, here some example of the fragment of cereals inside the bread fragment. You can see here how there is a cross section of a grain, and and then we also have the first known evidence of condiments being added to this flat bread. In this case, they were adding wild mustard seeds. And we also see that this bread was not only made of cereal, but also there is a continuation of the use of the tubers that Amaia mentioned for Shubeka 1. We also have them in these breads at Çatalhöyük, as you can see from this picture. This one, where you can see some of the microstructure of the root. But also, as I said, we do have the first leavened breads. And these breads, when I say naturally leavened, I don't mean a sourdough. I know many talks from this series have focused on the sourdough. But what I actually mean is that we believe that people in this community were making a bread dough, and they would leave this dough in the open air to gather some of the wild yeast that is floating in the environment. And then after 3-4 hours, they will bake this bread, and the consistency and microstructure of this bread will be a lot more porous, a lot more flexible, something like this. And this is a microstructure, a type of bread that it differs from the flat bread, in which, like, as I said, is very porous, and the pores are really, really small. So they really compare very well with experimentally prepared leavened breads. So I was able to conclude that at Çatalhöyük, there is a high reliance on bread products. They ate these products, this bread, every day. And they do have a well-established bread culture from the 7100 BC, with the later diversification of products coming in with porridge and porridge-like materials around 6500 BC. So I put some very nice images here for you to see how in the very early levels, we do have a lot of flat bread and dough and naturally leavened bread. And then we do see the porridge coming in around the middle Neolithic. And we do see how porridge kind of takes over during the late Neolithic period. This is really in contrast. It's really surprising because everybody always thought that bread was a late thing. Like bread was something that would come in later on instead of porridge coming later on, because it's easier to make porridge. You just mix it with milk or with water, and that's it. And bread actually takes a lot of effort in principle. And this also is contrasting with what we see from the Bronze Age. From the Bronze Age on, and I won't give you any more details, from the Bronze Age on, we do see a diversification of bread products, with bread being central to civilizations such as Uruk or Egypt. And we do see more than 300 types of bread being written down on the tablets of Uruk and also in Egypt. And these Egyptians are the ones that first added yeast and made beer. So we do see how perhaps in the Neolithic, there is like small diversification of bread-like products with porridge as well. But then this will really, really start and take off during the Bronze Age. We just wanted to say as well that the future direction of this work, as Amaia said, we should be investigating the gap between the first hunter-gatherers and the Neolithic traditions. We do need to start working on hunter-gatherers and early farming, and that's what Amaia's research is focusing at the moment. I personally, I am trying to develop the bread culture, focusing my research on Britain at the moment, and the contrasting bread culture of Europe, continental Europe, with a porridge and beer-based culture in Britain at that time. And we all need to start looking more systematically to the study of amorphous food remains that we can recover from archaeological sites, so that we can really have a big picture of what people were cooking and how they were mixing plant remains also with animal remains. And thank you very much. We put here some of the details for you to contact us if you have any questions or any further discussion. We are more than happy to talk to you about this and some of the organization and credits that we would like to thank. Thank you.
Yay! I'm clapping on behalf of all the people who are watching us right now. Thank you so much, Lara and Amaia. I'm waiting for any questions to come in. We had one about Mesopotamian beers, which I've already thrown a link in the Q&A about. But any other questions want to come up? I have a few questions in the meantime. I'll start with Amaia. Amaia, you were talking about with the hunter-gatherer timeline that you wouldn't be surprised to see breads even earlier than your paper had reported. What is your gut feeling about how early this could potentially go back?
I mean, here I'm talking about breads made with cereals, and we know that cereals were being exploited for thousands of years. There are even Neanderthal sites with evidence for grass exploitation, and we don't really know how Neanderthals were cooking. So I think it wouldn't be surprised to find food remains in this type of very old sites that could provide us with an evidence for, I don't know, bread making, but other sorts of food remains made with cereals, that's a possibility, certainly. And for the bread, I don't know. We know that, I don't know, barley, wheat, at least 20,000 years. It's not that, you know, I wouldn't be surprised, basically. Yeah. But we don't know. We have to investigate.
So in a few years, we'll get you for Neanderthal bread making. That'd be great.
Who knows? Who knows?
Oh, here we've got a question in here. Oh, so kind of a bread basics question. What's the difference between what we call sourdough bread and leavened bread? We mentioned leavened bread in your guys' chat. Maybe Laura, you can tackle that one.
Yes. So when I mentioned leavened bread, naturally leavened, I know that's a common phrase now for sourdough. What I actually meant is that you would make a bread dough with flour and water and salt, if you like, and then you will put it aside on the open air outside your window in your garden, and these people would just put it outside their houses, and they will leave it there for like 3-4 hours, or even longer, and the dough will gather the wild yeast that is suspended in the air, and it will automatically get into the dough, and that will create a natural fermentation. I don't know if this was accidental. I actually think it was accidental, but you know, I might be wrong, and maybe they were really aware of this and they were just doing it on purpose. But yeah, that's what I meant. That's the difference I meant. When you do a sourdough, as you know, I don't need to explain, but you do need to feed this. You need to like take care of it and like be constantly there for, you know, couple of weeks or a week, or you know, this would be more like a short period of time. You don't really need to do anything. The dough will take the yeast from the environment.
Which really makes me wonder about what you were talking about, the difference with the clean areas, right, and the dirty areas. So is it possible that some of the yeasts from some of your preserved, you know, bodies that are below the floor could potentially be making its way into that bread as well? That'd be interesting.
That's definitely a possibility, because we do think they were very clean, and there is a lot of evidence of these people cleaning regularly. So they would just sweep the floor really like almost, we don't know if every day, but it is a possibility because you live in an enclosed space of like what I think it was something like 7 or 10 meters square.
Wow.
And so, you know, you do have the dead people under the platforms, which even though they are covered with, you know, limestone and they are actually like quite closed, you still kind of reopen them and put more people in and they close it again. So yeah, there is a lot of things suspended in the air. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. And we've got one more question here I want to get to. Have either of you attempted to recreate any of these breads?
Yes, we both tried.
What do they
several
taste
times.
like? What was the experience?
So Amaia, you want to say about the
Yeah.
very old bread, the oldest bread?
So a couple of years ago, we did some experiments gathering the tubers in a wetland and processing them and getting flour out of it. And then we realized that only with the flour from the tubers, it was not possible to make a dough. So you actually have to add cereal flour because of the gluten. So that makes it like it forms a dough. So we were, calculating proportions between clavrush tuber flour and cereal flour and so forth. We did try it. We did some of the images were from the experimental work. Some of the doughs we did, which had very high clavrush tuber flour, were a bit gritty and salty, not very delicious, to be honest. But it's food is culture, so I'm sure they were eating it. Yeah, either way.
Yeah, the Neolithic breads were more, because they had ovens. So I did make my own ovens, and I also carried out some experimental work with students at UCL in London. And so we did make a lot of bread in ovens and recreating the whole recipe that I think they were using. And they were very, very tasteless. So it would be like, you just mix flour with water, because I didn't put any salt, because I don't think they had salt, at least not in Southwest Asia by that time. So yeah, it was a bit bland. That's all I can say, really. But it wasn't disgusting. It was actually like a flatbread that someone forgot to put salt in, something like that.
Awesome. Thank you both so much again for your expertise, your time. I know it's way past what would be my bedtime, where both of you are streaming from right now. So really appreciate it. And just so everybody knows, it's Laura's birthday tomorrow. So happy birthday, Laura, as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before I let everybody go, I just, of course, want to plug next week's talk. We have the one and only Vivian Howard will be live streaming from her kitchen. She's going to be talking with us about pickling and about kraut and how to pickle some of the vegetables that might be in your garden right now and other winter vegetables you might be planting right now. And this talk is co-hosted by us at Applied Ecology and also our friends at Quail Ridge Bookstore in North Raleigh and the Museum of Life and Science in Durham. So we're super happy to have them on board. That's not one to miss. So mark your calendars, November 5th, 4 o'clock Eastern time here in the US. Otherwise, thank you both again so much for your time. And yeah, hope you have a great birthday, Laura.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
having us.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.